that today, on account of the practices that we have adopted in agriculture over the last 70 years, our production environment has got disturbed. And as manifest by two important critical factors of production, namely water and soil, we see that in terms of water, there's a drawdown and the groundwater has run down terribly. And unless we're able to rejuvenate groundwater, we'll not be able to maintain our surface water in the rivers and rivulet system. And when it comes to water, we have already seen that the per capita availability of water has come down drastically from 5,500 cubic meters sometime in 1951 to around 1,400, and it is expected to further come down to 1,100 by next over the next 10 years. So if the situation is decreasing per capita availability of water and simultaneously compromise of the quality of water, then agriculture stands to lose. So we need to look at the way of rejuvenating water. And its cousin soil, which is very important as a medium of production, we now know the most important negative impact on agriculture in terms of soil has been the loss of soil organic carbon. Now, soil organic carbon is the most critical factor because it determines the structure of the soil, the fertility of the soil, and then ensures that the nutrients that we add to the soils are utilized properly. Unfortunately, we have a situation where the soil organic carbon has depleted, and now the average in India stands between zero point 0.1 to zero point 0.5. And there are very few soils that have more than 1 or 3 or 4. So we now need to start looking at rebuilding the soil organic carbon. So if we want to do these two things, we need to certainly look at a watershed approach in the sense that we start treating from ridge to valley based on the hydrological study of a particular system. And when we talk about watershed approach now, we know the technology. Yes, one can always debate around the ratio between the biological interventions and the engineering treatments. Certainly, we agree that given the current context, there has to be more emphasis on the biological nature of treatment vis-a-vis the engineering treatment. However, the engineering treatments cannot be forgotten because some of them are inevitable in terms, for example, of building, let's say, gully plugs or bunding, contour bunding, or building water harvesting structure. So some of the mechanical measures will become important. But then since biological interventions are more in the nature of soft components, people have neglected those things. But I think they are extremely important. And I am not going to what the detail or different aspects of biological treatments are. The related issue is how do we ensure that sustainability happens? I think that is the greatest concern. We have had very successful treatment of projects, but then we have not been able to sustain them over a long period of time. If sustainability is the concern, then I think the only way is to ensure that people own up these watersheds. And people's ownership will come from making them understand that watershed approach is in their interest. How do you create that incentive in them that there's no alternative but to go in for comprehensive, integrated, organically linked watershed approach to treatment of the soils and water and the life in general? And I guess that in order to create an interest among everybody, we need to ensure that different categories of people in that watershed develop a commonality of interest. And that means that not just the landed class, but also the landless class, including those who may not be dependent directly on farms, but practice their own artisanry, they all must be brought together and diagnosed in terms of what their interests are and ensure how the watershed can meet their demand. Let's say if we talk of carpentry, for example, is it that we can supply them bamboo by growing bamboo there? Or we supply agave, for example, for them to take up certain activities. Just an example. So the short point is that we must create a common interest in the enriched sustenance of the watershed approach. So if we would like to do that, then the watershed planning has to be well thought of. It has to be ground specific. It has to be very situation specific. And then I'm sure we'll be able to create that interest and take it forward.
You
As we
have two
do
more
these
minutes,
things,
sir.
yes, as we do these things, we must teach them the management practices. Today, the management practices will come once again from giving them the modern management practices, professional approach to managing the water resources, the soil resources, the canopy cover, the pasture lands, etc., etc., and simultaneously deployment of technology. Because the simple technology is deployed, they can be effective tools in their hand to manage them effectively. For example, how do they measure the water that is available and then utilize it, for example?